A federal judge in Texas reigniting the battle over Obamacare after striking down the law as unconstitutional. Good evening, I'm John Scott. This is the Fox Report. Democrats pledging to appeal Friday's ruling, which came just hours before the final day of enrollment for 2019. President Trump celebrating the decision as, quote, great news for America, though the White House has clarified that the law still stands and the ruling has no effect on current plans. The decision came in response to a legal challenge led by Texas involving more than a dozen states. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton saying the judge got it right.
Obviously, I'm celebrating with the president. This, we believe from the very beginning, was unconstitutional, and we think the judge did the right thing. The individual mandate was held by the 5 judges initially to be unconstitutional, but Robert switched over with the 4 liberals and said, but the taxing power of Congress upholds all of Obamacare. Well, now that the penalty was taken out by Congress at the end of last year in the tax reform bill, the taxing power issue is gone, and therefore the individual mandate falls.
The administration says it expects the case to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Lawmakers on both sides digging in.
If this gets it back up to the Supreme Court and causes John Roberts to review his very bad reasoning in the original decision, that would be a very good thing for the Constitution, for the American people, and for health care consumers.
I have every confidence that we're going to join the lawsuit when Democrats take back the House. The Trump administration didn't defend the ACA, and that's not to say it's worked perfectly. We have lots of ideas on how to make it work better and build upon its success, but taking it away completely is a big mistake.
Lauren Blanchard has the latest from Washington. Lauren.
Hi, John. Well, the White House has said they know appeals to the ruling are coming. And with so much already on the table in Congress a week out from a potential federal government shutdown, this is setting up for a big fight on Capitol Hill.
If this ruling were permitted to stand, 17 million Americans would lose their health insurance. 133 million Americans who have coverage for pre-existing medical conditions would lose it. Young people could no longer stay on their parents' plan until they're 26. So it would be devastating for the American people.
I believe that it's an opportunity in the next Congress to put forth better health care, focused on lowering prices and expanding access and quality. We do not need to move towards a more government-run health care system.
If the lawsuit makes it to the Supreme Court, as many think it will, it would be the 3rd time the justices consider fundamental provisions of Obamacare. Twice before, it has been upheld. And even though there are new justices on the bench since the last time Obamacare was before them, all of the 4 Democrats and Chief Justice Roberts, who upheld the bill in 2012, well, they're still on the bench. The president and his administration were quick to cheer Texas Judge Reed O'Connor's decision, which called Obamacare invalid, because O'Connor said when the last year's tax bill eliminated the penalty for not having coverage, he says the bill became unconstitutional. And the judge says Obamacare cannot be separated from that provision. The ruling, not the only bad news for Obamacare, according to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. This year, 4.1 million Americans have selected a plan through healthcare.gov. Last year, this same time, 4.6 million. We also see a lag when it comes to new customers and those renewing their plans. Overall, analysts seem to think the biggest reason enrollment numbers are down this year, lack of awareness. Tonight, up until 11:59 p.m. Pacific time, people can continue to enroll despite the ruling on the bill. John?
Lauren Blanchard. Lauren, thank you. President Trump speaking today on the federal court's decision declaring Obamacare unconstitutional and calling on Congress to come up with a replacement.
Well, it was a big ruling. It's a great ruling for our country. We'll be able to get great health care. We'll sit down with the Democrats if the Supreme Court upholds. We'll be sitting down with the Democrats, and we will get great health care for our people. That's a repeal and replace, handled a little bit differently, but it was a big, big victory by a highly respected judge.
Meanwhile, the president's White House shakeup continues. Ryan Zinke is stepping down as Interior Secretary, while Budget Director Mick Mulvaney has been named acting Chief of Staff. Ellison Barber is live in Washington with more on that. Ellison.
Hi, John. We've seen two high-level departures in about 7 days. President Trump announcing this morning that Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke will leave his position at the end of the year. Secretary Zinke has been the subject of more than a dozen federal investigations related to his and his wife's travel habits, Hatch Act violations, conflicts of interest. Some of the investigations were closed, and some, namely allegations of Hatch Act violations. Zinke was cleared of wrongdoing, but over the summer, the Interior Department's Inspector General launched an investigation into a real estate deal that involved a foundation set up by Mr. Zinke and a development group backed by the chairman of Halliburton, an oil service company that does a lot of business with the U.S. government. The IG reportedly referred that investigation to the Department of Justice. The secretary denied any wrongdoing. The president did not say why Zinke is leaving at this point in time, only that he will leave his post at the end of the year and that, quote, the Trump administration will be announcing the new Secretary of the Interior next week. The president says Zinke has accomplished much during his tenure. Those are his words. The top Democrat in the Senate says Zinke was, quote, one of the most toxic members of the cabinet, and the swamp will be a little less foul without him. Zinke's departure is one of 4 major staff shakeups since November midterms. Last week, of course, the president announced that his chief of staff would leave at the end of the year. Budget Director Mick Mulvaney is set to replace General John Kelly as acting chief of staff. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, is leaving her job. The president is hoping the Senate will confirm State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert as her replacement. Attorney General Jeff Sessions resigned in early November. At the president's request, Mr. Trump later announced his plan to nominate former Attorney General William Barr as Mr. Sessions' replacement. President Trump has had more turnover in his first 2 years than most of his predecessors, dating back to President Wilson. All of it's led to rumors and talk of a chaotic White House, of people not wanting to have powerful and coveted jobs in the White House. The president pushed back on that speculation, those rumors, on Twitter, saying that when it comes to the chief of staff job, at least, many people wanted it, and he believes Mick Mulvaney will do a good job. John?
Allison Barber, thanks. Special counsel Robert Mueller firing back at Michael Flynn's legal team for suggesting the FBI manipulated him into lying. This after Flynn's attorneys said the Bureau encouraged him not to have a lawyer present during questioning. Alan Dershowitz saying the FBI acted inappropriately.
But the FBI shouldn't be sending people in telling you not to have counsel and hope maybe you'll commit a crime so that then they can squeeze you and get you to sing or compose. That's not the way American law enforcement should operate, and every civil libertarian, Democrat or Republican, should be concerned about this. And if the shoe were on the other foot, if this were done to one of Hillary Clinton's people, every liberal civil libertarian I know would be up in arms. But today they're enthusiastically applauding this FBI technique.
Garrett Tenney has more on that.
Michael Flynn's attorneys argue he was coerced into lying when he spoke to the FBI in January of 2017. Newly released court documents show that then Deputy Director of the FBI Andrew McCabe urged Flynn not to bring an attorney to an interview with agents. In a note, McCabe wrote that he told Flynn he wanted to have 2 of my agents interview him as quickly, quietly, and discreetly as possible, adding, I further stated that if Lieutenant General Flynn wished to include anyone else in the meeting, like the White House counsel, for instance, that I would need to involve the Department of Justice. Flynn then agreed to meet with the agents alone. The documents also show the FBI intentionally chose not to tell Flynn that it's a crime to lie to the FBI. But Mueller's team argues the Bureau did nothing wrong and that nobody forced Flynn to lie on multiple occasions to agents as well as members of the administration about his contacts with Russia's ambassador, writing, quote, a sitting national security advisor, former head of an intelligence agency, retired lieutenant general, and 33-year veteran of the armed forces, knows he should not lie to federal agents. But critics, including Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz, say Flynn's case highlights some of the unsavory tactics the special counsel is using in its investigation.
What Judge Ellis was saying is what Mueller is doing is trying to find low-hanging fruit, figure out every way to get them to commit a crime. It's their fault if they commit the crime, and then squeeze them so that they'll sing or compose. Welcome to how special counsel operate.
The special counsel's office has recommended Flynn serve no jail time due to his cooperation. He's scheduled to be sentenced on Tuesday, but it's possible with these new filings, the judge could delay that hearing. John?
Tenney. Garrett, thank you. Another round of protests in Paris today from the Yellow Vest movement, the fifth weekend in a row with demonstrations in the French capital. Police saying at least 115 people were taken into custody because of the protests, and at least 7 were slightly injured. The demonstrators are angry at French President Emmanuel Macron and his policies.
We want to live free, free to have the right to actually enjoy the fruit of our labor, free to create and invent without the heavy weight of the horrible bureaucracy and taxes, free to pay reasonable taxes to help our fellow citizens in need, free to have a home and live with dignity.
Greg Palcott is in Paris now with more.
John, another day of anti-government protests here in Paris and across France. There were clashes, but not as many as we saw last Saturday. The so-called Yellow Vest activists were out on the Champs-Élysées, around the old Opera House here, the Louvre Museum, another landmark in Paris. At some locations, police did use tear gas and water cannons to disperse the crowds. There was some scuffling between the two sides. 7 are reported to have been injured. But there were 115 arrests today. Last week, there was 1,000. The number of protesters today, something like 4,000. Last week, it was 8,000. Police, though, we can tell you from personal observation, they were out in big numbers. We spent much of the day watching a game of cat and mouse across the city. Authorities trying to avoid a repeat of the violence we have witnessed. One reason for the drop in trouble, concessions made in a national television address earlier this week from President Macron. High taxes, low wages, and a government not seen to be listening to its people thought to be factors in this protest. Another reason, the deadly terror attack this past week in Strasbourg. Police finding and killing the man responsible for it on Thursday night. 2 more factors perhaps tamping down these protests, cold weather and the upcoming holiday season. But we were told by an expert, expect a very hot January. John.
Greg Palcott, thank you. Meantime, smaller Yellow Vest demonstrations also taking place in other parts of Europe, one in London and one seen here in Belgium's capital, Brussels. Protesters are concerned about low wages, high taxes, and social welfare. One demonstrator says the struggle to make ends meet unites them. At least 1 person was detained by police after that protest. A couple of big storms are on the way. Will the roads be safe where you are? We'll take a look at the forecast in your area coming up. Plus, with a partial government shutdown looming and Congress heading home for the holidays, will the funding for a border wall be resolved? The latest on that argument ahead.
You guys going to get home for Christmas?
Well, I started ordering food from the caterer that I was going to make myself. So I don't know. I honestly think that this president would not mind saying he kept Congress in for Christmas.
Tonight on the Greg Gutfeld Show, stories so ridiculous I can't believe they exist. An actual medical study that shows James Bond drinks too much. The superstar athlete that says we didn't land on the moon. They still haven't found anyone to host the Oscars. Do I have to do everything? People. And what was Mike Pence thinking during that Oval Office meeting? Grab some gingerbread and candy canes. It's almost time for the greatest hour in the history of TV. 10 o'clock tonight, Eastern. Don't miss it.
The Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security announces an investigation into the death of a 7-year-old Guatemalan girl who died after being detained by Border Patrol agents in New Mexico. The incident underscoring the dangers migrants face on the journey from Central America. Here's former acting ICE Director Thomas Homan.
When you entice people like with low asylum levels, when you entice people saying we want to abolish ICE, when you entice people, we want to build sanctuary cities where you can come in the country legally and feel safe, you entice people to make this dangerous journey. And unfortunately, people die making that journey. And I feel very badly about this little girl. But, you know, the Border Patrol agents, I'm sure, did the best they could in a very tough situation.
Jackie Heinrich is here now with more. Jackie.
Well, John, there are questions over whether Border Patrol gave that little girl any food or water during the 8.5 hours she was held in Antelope Wells, New Mexico, all before a bus brought her to a processing center an hour and a half away. By the time she arrived there, she was not breathing. The girl's been identified as 7-year-old Jacqueline Calmaquin from Guatemala. She and her father were detained with more than 160 others in a remote stretch of desert before being bused in groups to Lordsburg. When she was first detained in Antelope Wells, Border Patrol didn't note any illness, and her father signed a waiver saying she was in good health. Less than 48 hours later, she died of septic shock, dehydration, and fever at a hospital in El Paso, Texas. Agents brought her there by medical helicopter after she arrived at the Lordsburg facility unresponsive. She had to be revived twice. Just over an hour ago, her father issued a statement asking for an investigation and saying nobody has explained to him the cause of his daughter's death.
Prior to going into CBP custody, and contrary to the report that Jacqueline had not eaten or had water for several days, Jacqueline had not been crossing the desert for days. Jacqueline's father took care of Jacqueline, made sure she was fed and had sufficient water.
While Homeland Security is explaining why it took so long to get Jacqueline to Lordsburg, saying that while the death is tragic, it shows the dangers of illegal border crossing.
What happened here was they were about 90 miles away from where we could process them. They came in such a large crowd that it took our Border Patrol folks a couple times to get them all. We gave immediate care.
Congressional Democrats say the death raises significant questions about how children are treated at Border Patrol facilities. They sent a letter to the acting inspector general asking for answers as to whether she was given food or water and why Congress was first made aware of the death from media reports, not from Border Patrol. Now, the girl's mother is still in Guatemala. Jacqueline's body will be returned to her home country. John.
Sad story. Jackie Heinrich, thanks.
Thank you.
6 days. That's how long President Trump and Congress have to fund a government and prevent a partial shutdown. Funding for President Trump's border wall is a key bone of contention in negotiations. The president wants $5 billion for the wall. Congressional Democrats are saying no way to that.
Democrats have always supported border security. We added $1.2 billion last time. That money hasn't even been spent yet. So the idea of shutting down the government for a costly, ineffective wall makes no sense. I hope the president comes to his senses.
But it ought to be a no-brainer. In fact, the House passed several bills over the years to authorize the construction of a wall.
William Lajeunesse is in Los Angeles now with more.
We need a wall in certain parts. No, not in all parts, but in certain parts of a 2,000-mile border, we need a wall.
What the president means by wall is confusing and part of the problem.
We think the wall is a bad strategy.
In fact, many sections of the border are already lined by more than 100 miles of steel bollard-style fencing, or what Trump calls a wall.
Our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more.
Since the 1990s, lawmakers from both parties approved and built some 650 miles of border fence of various designs. Congress approved 700 miles of double fencing in 2006, with a majority of Senate Democrats, including Schumer, Clinton, Biden, and Obama, voting for it.
The bill before us will certainly do some good. It will authorize some badly needed funding for better fences.
President Trump so far replaced 31 miles of barrier.
So we've started the wall, $1.6 billion.
That money will pay for an additional 93 miles, but the president wants more.
If we got $5 billion, we could do a tremendous chunk of wall.
We're not going for the $5 billion for the wall. We simply are not.
$5 billion will buy another 215 miles in San Diego, El Centro, Yuma, El Paso, Laredo, and the Rio Grande Valley, unless Congress objects.
There's no moral difference between a fence and a wall, so it makes no sense. The only argument to deny Trump the wall is because they hate Trump.
So far, the White House has not clarified if the new money would be used to replace old fence or extend the existing one, or how much of the $5 billion pays for more manpower, judges, sensors, cameras, drones, which are likely part of the border security negotiation. In Los Angeles, William Lajeunesse, Fox News.
Education Secretary Betsy DeVos will cancel $150 million in student loan debt. This coming after a federal judge ordered the department to implement the Obama-era policy. The loans are connected to for-profit colleges. DeVos reportedly called the program a free money giveaway. More than half of the loans went to pay the now defunct Corinthian colleges. Well, stormy weather is moving east with potential record-setting rainfall possible, flooding in the mid-Atlantic, making for some rough travel. We're taking a look at the wet forecast now. AccuWeather's Aaron Calandra is here. Aaron.
Well, John, much of the country is quiet right now, but we are certainly seeing a lot of rain across the Midwest and also the Northeast. It's because of an upper-level low that's creating some very wet conditions. You can see pockets of heavy downpours. Washington, D.C. getting hit pretty hard. We do expect about 1.5 to 2.5 inches in general, but there are pockets where we could see about 3, maybe even 4 inches tonight and into tomorrow. So right now we do have some flood warnings and watches in place. Now, with a warning, that means flooding is happening, and if you are near a stream or a river, you certainly could be seeing some of that. Turn around, don't drown, find an alternative route. Now notice, in D.C. we've already seen more than 1.5 inches of rain. That has pushed us over the all-time record. That was set back in the 1800s, and now we have the wettest year on record here across Washington, D.C., Baltimore as well, and a close second in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Further to the south, you can see we also have some heavier rain right along the coast. In Wilmington, a little less than 1 inch, but look at this record. They've seen more than 100 inches of rain this year. That smashes the previous record that was set back in 1877. So the rain is going to continue across the Northeast tomorrow, and even a wintry mix further to the north. So if you're traveling, be careful. It will be slippery. We'll see gusty downpours from New York to Philadelphia. So the I-95, it's going to be a bit dicey. Taking a look at the winds, that's another big story today. Look at these wind reports from earlier. 76 miles per hour in Livingston, Montana. That's dangerous for travelers on the highways, and also property damage. If you have Christmas decorations outside, bring them in, because they could end up who knows where. Now, one place to keep your eye on this week is going to be the Pacific Northwest. We have a whole train of moist air coming in off the ocean, from the ocean, and we're going to see a lot of rain. Already a couple of showers developing in Washington and also into Oregon. It's going to pick up tonight, and tomorrow we expect to see soaking downpours and could see up to a couple of feet of snow in the highest elevations. We're talking about 5,000 feet and above, so the passes, they should be all right for now, but we also expect to see that heavy rain creating some flooding for the I-5, so travelers there, it's going to be a bit tricky throughout this week. Back to you.
Aaron Callander, thanks for the heads up. Wisconsin is bracing for a flurry of lawsuits after Republican Governor Scott Walker signs a bill weakening the powers of his Democratic successor. Details on that ahead, plus a heated back and forth between Michael Flynn's attorneys and special counsel Robert Mueller. This amid accusations that the FBI tricked Flynn into lying.
General Flynn's attorneys were right in raising questions about the way Flynn was approached and questioned. It confirms that the FBI agents, including Peter Strzok, didn't see any indications of lying by Flynn. In fact, they believed he was telling the truth, and that he believed he was telling the truth.
Tonight on Justice, Anthony Scaramucci and Governor Mike Huckabee join me live. Plus, my exclusive one-on-one with Secretary of Health and Human Services, Alex Azar. He'll take us to the front lines in the war against opioids in America. A jam-packed Justice live tonight at 9 Eastern. See you then.
I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. It's the bottom of the hour, and if you're just joining us, it's been a big and busy week in the Mueller investigation. A judge sentencing former Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen to 3 years in prison. This as the special counsel pushes back against former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's suggestion that FBI agents tricked him into lying. This all less than a week before he is scheduled to be sentenced. Here to talk about it all, Axios reporter Steph Kite. It seems to be the feeling in Washington that Michael Cohen is not likely to get much of a prison term at all, maybe a suspended sentence, right?
That's true. He could get anywhere from no sentence at all to possibly as much as 6 months. And we saw that the Mueller team also suggested that he have a pretty low sentence given how cooperative he's been with the investigation. So we're certainly not expecting any long sentences next week when he does receive his sentence.
There are complaints that essentially the FBI tricked Flynn into issuing misleading statements. Tom Fitton was on Fox and Friends this morning. He's the president of Judicial Watch. I want you to hear what he has to say.
Now we know whose idea was this? James Comey. So you had this corrupt duo of Comey and McCabe targeting Flynn for what?
He talked to the Russian ambassador, his incoming national security advisor. There was no reason to go after him, but to target him and to get a scalp as they embarked on their anti-Trump campaign.
So what does Mueller get out of Michael Flynn? I mean, if there's not going to be jail time resulting from whatever it is he has done, it doesn't seem like the offense is all that serious.
I mean, it is certainly clear that Flynn has cooperated with the Mueller investigation and given them crucial clues and information needed as they probe the possibility of any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russians, and whether Trump wrongly fired James Comey in order to obstruct the investigation. And while it is clear that Mueller doesn't think this was maybe the biggest deal in the world, he suggests that he have a relatively low sentence. They do push back on the fact that the FBI intentionally kind of misled Flynn, that they intentionally did not warn him of what would happen if he lied in the investigation. They essentially said, look, you were the former national security advisor, you were the head of an intelligence agency, you've had 33 years as a general in the U.S. military, you should know better than to lie to federal investigators.
But the FBI essentially encouraged him not to bring a lawyer to their discussions, right?
There are reports that say they encouraged him not to bring a lawyer to these meetings. And again, if this was just in the beginning, they wanted him to be able to answer truthfully. And regardless of whether or not this was a huge lie or a small lie, and regardless of whether it was perfectly normal for him to have met with the Russian ambassador, that very well could have been the case. But again, they kind of pushed back on this idea that he didn't know and that he should have just told the truth whether this happened or not, especially if it was something that he claims that was perfectly normal and part of his job.
Of course, James Comey was still in his job as head of the FBI at the time Flynn was questioned. Robert Ray, who is a former Whitewater independent counsel, has some criticism for how Mr. Comey handled this whole matter. Listen to this.
I think I disagree with some people that, well, that's entrapment. It's not legal entrapment. And I also agree that, you know, there's no question that Michael Flynn and someone in his position should know better and knows the consequences of not telling the truth to an FBI agent. So I don't condone the conduct, and I'm not trying to excuse it. But I do know that it was a trap for the unwary. And I do know if someone like Jim Comey had pulled a stunt like that in my administration, that would have been cause to get rid of him.
So he says it was a trap for General Flynn.
And it very well could have been part of their technique in investigating Flynn when they were asking him these questions. Maybe it was part of their technique to try to get him to answer the questions and be more relaxed, which has been reported and is kind of what President Trump has even pointed to in his own tweets, pointing to the fact that, oh, well, the reason that Mueller is giving him this lower sentence is because he knows he was mistreated, has kind of been the line of argument from a lot of people. And of course, it is, you know, it is right for them to have given him the heads up. Of course, if you lie to a federal prosecutor, you're going to face legal challenges.
So where do we stand here? The indications are that Robert Mueller's probe is winding down, but for all of the bluster and all of the accusations, there is still no indication that the Trump campaign, you know, that Mueller has any evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russian government or agents of the Russian government to change the outcome of the 2016 election.
Certainly, the bottom line is that, yeah, sure, we haven't seen anything explicitly come out of this investigation that would connect Trump or the Trump campaign to intentionally colluding with Russians to impact the 2016 presidential election. But the other thing that we know is that Robert Mueller has been very quiet about his dealings. We have seen his progress mostly through indictments and subpoenas and through court documents, but we really don't know what Robert Mueller knows yet. We don't know his timeline. While it does feel that we could be reaching the end here, there's still a lot of questions that haven't been answered.
Steph Kite, reporter with Axios. Steph, thank you.
Thank you.
For much more on all of this, tune in to Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace will sit down with President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani. That's tomorrow at 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern here on Fox News Channel. Wisconsin Governor and Republican Scott Walker signing controversial lame duck bills that strip power from incoming Governor Tony Evers and the incoming state attorney general, both of whom are Democrats. Those powers will be transferred to the Republican-controlled legislature. Ben Handelman has more.
In his final significant act as governor, there is nothing lame about the lame duck session bill Scott Walker signs into law in Green Bay Friday.
There's a lot of hype and hysteria, particularly in the national media, somehow implying that this is a power shift. It's not.
The new controversial laws limit early voting hours and does transfer some powers from the office of the governor and attorney general, which will soon be held by Democrats, back to the legislature, which is in firm Republican control. The governor argues the office remains one of the most powerful of its kind in the country. Governor-elect Tony Evers says it goes against the decision made clear by voters.
What I've said all along is still true, that the will of the people was ignored.
While the bills have been passed into law, the fight is likely far from over. Experts say get ready for lawsuits.
I don't know everything that's next, but two components are going to be a lot of chaos and a whole lot of litigation.
Jeremy Levinson is an attorney who has worked for Democrats in the past. He says there is plenty from Friday's signings to argue in court.
No one's ever engaged in this kind of categorical heist of another branch of government's power before. And it's going to take a long time to shake out, and it'll be interesting for some of us. It'll be expensive for all of us.
I want Wisconsin to do well. I want Tony Evers to be successful. I want the legislature to be successful. I just want to make sure there's a balance going forward.
Political battles now written in ink appears destined for a courtroom.
Years. This is going to be in litigation for years.
Fox affiliate WITI's Ben Handelman. Thank you. Wisconsin, not the only state seeing lame duck bills. Michigan Governor Rick Snyder signing bills that scale back citizen-initiated measures to raise Michigan's minimum wage and require paid sick leave for workers. The business community in the state reportedly pushed for this as a way to avoid jeopardizing the economy. However, opponents see it as an unconstitutional attack on voters. The Seattle University Law School scrapping its externship program with ICE after a student complaint led to an online petition. Advocates of the program pushing back, saying the move deprives students of valuable professional experience. Dan Springer has more from Seattle.
Following a single complaint from student Alex Romero and an online petition signed by several hundred others, Seattle University's law school suspended its externship program with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
Every nation enforces their immigration laws, and for those students, I think they've been cheated.
Citing the school's, quote, special responsibility to be peacemakers, the law school's Dean Annette Clark defended the decision, arguing the school should, quote, assist those who are suffering due to the unjust operation of our legal system, laws, and their enforcement.
I think it's a good decision, and it reflects Seattle's views in a positive way.
Former ICE director and Fox News contributor Thomas Holman calls the move misguided.
It's not all about administrative immigration, which I know is very controversial, very emotional, but they work on a lot of national security, terrorism investigations. They do a lot of work surrounding the removal and deportation of known and suspected terrorists.
ICE's legal team includes 1,200 lawyers and 300 support staff in 70 U.S. cities. Most are in front of immigration judges in facilities like the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma. Law school students routinely help lower the case backload. ICE's principal legal advisor tells Fox News it's disheartening that an institution dedicated to teaching the laws of this country and whose core values include justice and diversity would prevent its students from gaining valuable professional experience. National law school rankings suggest Seattle U could use all the work-study programs it could get. It ranks near the bottom of several lists when it comes to graduates passing the bar the first time and actually working as a lawyer. The law school student who made the complaint about ICE and the university declined our request for an interview. In Seattle, Dan Springer, Fox News.
New clues in the search for a missing Colorado mother as police begin to question those closest to her. We have the latest on the case coming up.
It's been 23 days that has passed since Kelsey was last seen. Do I think Kelsey's still alive? That's absolutely a possibility, and that is our hope.
Police ramping up the search for missing Colorado mother Kelsey Barrett, last seen on Thanksgiving Day. Investigators now call her disappearance suspicious. Jeff Paul live in Los Angeles with the latest. Jeff?
Well, John, police say it could take days to complete the search of fiancé Patrick Frazie's home. While he's not considered a suspect or person of interest, investigators say he has not directly spoken with them. So far, all of the communication with authorities has been through Frazie's lawyer.
Have him sit down with one of our investigators, and that's what we're asking for, is just for him to sit down with an investigator, since he was the last person to talk with Kelsey face-to-face from what we can tell.
Barrett was last seen publicly entering a Safeway grocery store in Woodland Park, Colorado on Thanksgiving, November 22nd. Her fiancé said he last saw her that same day when he met with Barrett to pick up their daughter. 10 days later, Barrett's mom reported her missing on December 2nd. John?
So what evidence have the investigators uncovered so far?
Well, John, the search warrant for Frazie's home is sealed, so we don't know its probable cause, but we do know police received data showing Barrett's last cell phone ping coming from nearly 800 miles away in Idaho. Investigators say her last known communication was through a text to her fiancé sent on November 25th and one to her employer saying she wouldn't be at work next week. Barrett's mom says this behavior isn't like her daughter.
She doesn't run off, and someone knows where she's at. Kelsey, we just want you home. Call us if you can, and we won't quit looking.
Frazie's attorney released a statement saying that he continues to cooperate with law enforcement and that Frazie has never been asked to voluntarily participate in the search of his home. We also just a few minutes ago were learning there is now a $25,000 reward being offered for information that leads to the location or safe return of Barrett. This after Woodland Park Police received an anonymous donation. John?
Jeff Paul from Los Angeles tonight. Thank you, Jeff. With flu season in full swing, disturbing new numbers on how many people are skipping the vaccine. Plus, what does politics have to do with dating? According to the experts, a whole lot. More than 40% of Americans say they do not plan on getting a flu shot. This according to a new study by the National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago. People say they don't want the shot for fear of side effects or because they don't believe it actually works. Last year, more than 900,000 people were hospitalized with the flu. More than 80,000 died. Meanwhile, a new study out of Harvard finding that folks who drink a glass of wine a day are less likely to spend time at the hospital. The research focused on adults living in Italy who ate a Mediterranean diet. The study also makes a case for moderation, revealing that those who drank multiple glasses were more likely to go to the hospital. Our country's divided politics causing repercussions in the realm of dating. And according to matchmaking experts, President Trump looms large. Steve Rappaport has that story.
How important is political compatibility to you?
Oh, it's super important.
Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, there's no denying President Trump has had a major impact on American culture, and that includes the dating world.
At this time, with like a Donald Trump, if you had those kind of beliefs, I might have to shy away from you.
I'm pretty conservative, so I would typically like to find someone more conservative.
I wish I would have known before I got married my husband's political views a little bit better.
As politics become more polarized, it's starting to creep into the world of relationships, with singles becoming more politically picky about who they date. Relationship experts say more folks are now pairing up based on their political compatibility, and they advise if you have strong leanings to the right or left, make it known early on.
While somebody might say they're middle of the road politically, they really have opinions, and it plays itself out on the dates.
There are now a number of apps and websites designed specifically for people who don't want to date their political opposites, so you won't have to swipe left if you're adverse to folks with different beliefs. But for some singles, the strength of those beliefs are more important than the details.
As long as you're not too far to left, too far right, and you have a brain, you can actually think.
Politics don't really have to do anything with love. I mean, it doesn't really make a difference.
How important is political compatibility to you in a relationship?
Not really. It's more about the match.
Ultimately, most experts say honesty is still the most important factor at the start of any relationship, and they're urging couples to put more emphasis on their similarities so the romance can survive the political divide.
If they focus on what makes them feel connected with each other rather than looking for the differences in the beginning, especially, they're going to start off on a healthier foundation.
A recent survey showed 1 in 10 Americans have ended a relationship over political differences since President Trump took office. In New York, Steve Rappaport, Fox News.
A very special day today at national cemeteries across the country as Wreaths Across America honors our fallen veterans with wreath-laying ceremonies.
It's a very emotional morning. For them, they come up to me and tell me thank you because of that one wreath. That means that their loved one is not forgotten. That $15 donation, that represents one service member and the family that they left behind.
Today is National Wreaths Across America Day. The annual event honors our fallen veterans with wreaths placed on their graves at some 1,600 national cemeteries all across the nation and even overseas.
We are always humbled by how many people come out every year. And this year we had, at 11 a.m., we had over 56,000 volunteers at Arlington National Cemetery specifically. Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And, people are watching the weather or the news. It was pouring down rain all day long. We were able to receive sponsorships for all 256,000 headstones at Arlington National Cemetery.
Earlier today, President Trump visited Arlington National Cemetery for a wreath-laying ceremony. The president saying the organization Wreaths Across America does a great job. And that's how Fox reports on this Saturday, December 15th. I'm John Scott. Thanks for watching. Life, Liberty, and Levin is up next.